Hello and welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We've got some really interesting topics to cover today. When I first spoke with Amanda about this panel, it was all inclusive of everything having to do with recruiting, hiring, retention, promotion. She also says we have about 20 or 25 minutes to cover all of that. And then subsequently, thankfully, we've gotten a bit more time and we've got some time to go into depth. But we are going to kind of stay in the domain of people, recruitment, hiring. We can cross off a whole section thanks to Martha with her masterclass on designing a loop for hiring. So that you saved us some time, Martha. Thank you very much. But before we dive in, I would love to just introduce our panelists today and thank them for taking time out of their day to join us. So if you don't mind, Vicky, why don't you kick it off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Vicky. I'm a CTO at a SaaS business called 𝒂𝒄𝒌. Previously worked in quite a lot of startups, scale-ups, and this is my first private equity company. So that's me.
I'm Kat. I'm the talent director at 𝒂𝒄𝒌 at the moment. So I both scout the teams that we look to invest in and assess their capabilities to build high-performing teams and businesses. And before that, I was, working in the weeds as an operator myself in a number of startups and scale-ups all things people.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Paul Hammond. I'm currently the CTO at Native Instruments, which is a company that makes music technology products, hardware and software for musicians and producers and other things. Prior to that, I was at 𝒍𝒊𝒌𝒆 as the CTO there, and then before that, lots of big corporates. So I was at Microsoft for 15 years and worked on Bing and Skype, and I went to eBay for a while as well. So lots of experience in hiring in both large and smaller kind of PE environments.
Hello, I'm Sally Late, and I'm currently Engineering Director for Trust and Safety at Bumble Inc. And I previously worked in lots of different startups and scale-ups, going back to global digital agencies as well, so hopefully a mix of experience to bring. But yeah, I'm responsible for engineering and data and machine learning functions at the moment.
Excellent. All right. Well, in discussing how we wanted to tackle this, I really wanted to lead with some contrarian points of view and hear from our panelists whether they agree or disagree with some of our provocative statements. So this panel is ostensibly on kind of hiring, recruiting, retaining, and in thinking this through, I'd like to throw out our first provocative contrarian statement, or at least my first provocative and contrarian statement, which is, when considering hiring, so this is the scale-up, startup track, so clearly if you're going to do that, you may consider the need to add more humans to your organization. When considering hiring, I would say the first rule of hiring is don't hire anybody. And I want to hear from our panelists thoughts, experiences, and cautionary tales on whether or not they agree with that statement.
So I think, this is a trap I have quite often seen a lot of startups our advice fall into, where they correlate headcount growth with success. And they go, for growing, we're doing well. Let's add more people. And you get managers as well who become a little bit kind of empire building. And, politically, the size of your team might give you a certain weight in the organization. And I would say really what you're actually looking for, firstly, is there any other way of solving the problem that is going to cost you less money, less time? Quite often, if you said to a manager, right, this is your budget for the year, and you have to split that between how you're going to develop your existing talent to solve the problems that you're facing, how you're going to hire in new people to fill those gaps, how you are going to promote the people that you've got to keep them. Suddenly, hiring comes much further down the list of priorities and where they would put that money. But when it's someone else's money and they can just go to a CFO and ask for more money, it's very easy to say you need more people. And so I think kind of forcing teams into doing, as much as you can in a startup, there'll always be a big dose of ambiguity, but as much as you can think about a capability and a capacity headcount plan to say, what do we not have the capabilities in the team right now to be able to do? We are lacking these hard skills. There is no one in the team who can teach the rest of the team these skills. So that has to come in externally. Or what is a capacity problem where we know what we need to do, but we just need more people to be able to get there by this deadline? The question then is, well, where's that deadline come from? You know, this is always a trade-off between how much you invest in how fast you want to get somewhere. But bear in mind that what you're looking to do in you know, your hiring approach is actually look for efficiency of talent. People talk a lot about talent density. I think post layoffs in the last year or two, it's become a bit of a buzzword. How do you improve your talent density? I'd argue you're looking to improve your talent efficiency. So if actually you could either upskill your existing team who have that domain knowledge, who can go a lot faster, if you can reduce the time it takes to ramp up a new hire, so if you can make sure that every new hire you add to the organization can get to delivering at peak performance 2 months earlier, you know, then you're going to need to hire less people over your headcount plans over the year. So if you're looking for where can you make your organization more efficient, rather than throw more people, which will always slow you down on time spent interviewing, disruption of time spent onboarding, time spent assessing. You won't get it right every time, so then you're going to have to exit people, you're going to have to rehire. Every gamble you take and every hire is a gamble to some degree, and you can mitigate how big that risk is through your hiring practices, but it's still a gamble. And so you're increasing uncertainty and risk in your organization with every hire. So I would always look for where you can improve efficiency, where you can reduce the need to hire, where you can solve that problem a different way, buying a solution in rather than building it yourself, before you rely on hiring as a last resort.
I would agree with that. Definitely. I've got one of these fancy lapel mics. Definitely. I think the costs associated with hiring are often underestimated in teams as well. Like I've seen teams go into sort of scale up mode where they're adding people and, you know, the promise is, oh, that it takes 2 months to ramp up and suddenly we're going to be twice the capacity in this team. But, you know, as Kat said, the drain on interviewing time and the drain on onboarding time as well. It is, you know, there's a whole cultural reset you do when you add a new person into a team as well. I think it's very easy to forget about that in the midst of all the excitement of think of all the things we can do, think of all the skills we can hire. So I think the cultural debt you incur by hiring quickly as well. I like to think of hiring, especially given the last few years and the experience we've all had now with the changing landscape. I think hiring as a last resort is a really nice way to frame the problem. And as Kat says, like how do you get those skills in any other way?
Can I say one more thing, which is even if you go with hiring as a solution, I think we all get caught up in the fantasy of suddenly bringing on board some really great people a week from now. And of course, that is really not the way it works out. And it takes a long time usually to find the right people. And so for me, I like to think about it slightly differently. I like to think about we have who we have as a finite thing. And that leads to what you were talking about, which is how do you go and review, retrospect your current environment in a way that allows you to get as much as you can out of the people that you have? And that could be training and growth. It could be efficiency or effectiveness. It could be other things. Hiring as sort of a secondary addition, then it becomes super joyous when you find the right people, because you've already started in on being a more effective organization with who you have. And I think it really can define your learning and development strategy. It can define your hiring strategy ultimately, but also it can just define how you get the work done that you currently have on your plate. And it can help you understand your constraints as well.
Sally, I see you nodding your head several times.
Yes, but Paul's also told me that it will be a terrible panel if we all just agree with each other. So trying
first
not to do
question,
that.
so we should obviously
I know. Okay, we'll start that nice.
We're easing our way in. So interesting, we just had a really beautiful articulation from Stephen on the cost of delay. And given how much time and effort goes into recruiting at scale, it just occurred to me, you just add to the cost of delay of everything. So Paul, I know that when you were at Ẓupla, we took the team from about 60 people to about 300. And I know that we kept track of all the hours and the conversion rates and everything. We had about a 4 or 5% conversion rate from CVs in to hires to offers accepted. And we were keeping track of the hours, and we broke 3,000 before we stopped counting. Like, was it worth it?
Was it worth it? Wow. So we learned a lot of things, and that could probably create a talk in and of itself. If you have a need to grow that rapidly, and you have a need to have a highly effective team that can achieve outcomes from your business, you have to put the time in. There's no question. And I think if we were, going to talk about, this is obviously a question around not hiring, but if you absolutely have to hire, put a lot of time and thought into the process you use to find the people. And again, great session this morning with some even more good ideas for me to kind of contemplate. But because we put the time and effort in, it became worth it. And what ended up happening over time was we added, it was something like 200 people. I think we onboarded 200 people during lockdown, which was quite a fun feat. We got really, really good at hiring and onboarding. But you could see it in the culture over time that because we put the time and energy into defining a great hiring process and being clear about our expectations for hiring, that translated into a really effective team. I've got different stories about whether or not that team was able to then subsequently achieve. There's lots of other things we could throw in there, but in terms of was it worth it to put that energy into hiring those people? I think so. It created the culture we wanted, and I think we onboarded just some fantastic colleagues. It was one of the funnest times for me in my career, just in terms of landing a great team. So yeah, I mean, be prepared to put the time in, I guess, is the short answer to that question, for sure.
I'm hearing a couple of themes, but again, maybe perhaps another provocative statement that I'll throw out there, which is if you need to hire, you are not rigorous and you do not have good hygiene in prioritizing the work that you're doing as a company.
So I think sometimes about how would you shift that incentive for managers? So at the start I said, a lot of people see hiring as a measure of success. What if instead, you were measured on your effectiveness as a manager on how well you developed your existing talent and how many promotions happened from within your team? And instead, having to go outside and hire meant that you'd failed as a manager in developing the talent you brought in, because you'd hired those people for their potential. You've hired them because you think they can do brilliant things. And so if you start to reframe culturally, that sentiment around hiring, I think it would lead to some very interesting conversations. And I think, yes, hiring then becomes last resort, and you do have to be slightly careful it doesn't then become a last minute rush, because I think the flip side of this is then people put it off and don't want to hire because you create a culture of saying hiring is a sign that we haven't nailed it according to plan. And then you're rushing because you need someone, and so you compromise your hiring quality. So there is this balance to find. I don't want to kind of go too far on one side and say, don't hire, because then when you realize you really do need to hire, you need to hire and you need someone next week and you're going to rush it. So there is a balance to find here. But I kind of talk to teams about being more measured in understanding the upstream and downstream impacts of your team, because quite often that rush to hire is a sign that your organization has become slightly wonky. So you have teams who plan their needs in silos. And if you think about, what should a product development team look like? Typically, it might be one product manager for 5 engineers, for half a designer, for half an analyst, and you want to kind of keep those ratios roughly consistent. So if suddenly your head of engineering is going to hire 30 new devs, but your head of product is not talking about hiring any product managers, your product team's going to feel a crunch in 6 months' time once those engineers start landing. And so, you really need to kind of think about the balance and the timing, and is one team hiring a lot externally and other teams are developing internally, and can those things happen at the same pace? Will they stay in sync, or is it going to create bottlenecks in the organization later?
I think the important point here is the importance of alignment for me and being very deliberate, because actually, going back to your provocative statement, I don't actually see it as failing or as needing to, you're just not being good enough with your prioritization. There are times when actually hiring brings you other benefits. So I think it very much depends on whether you are kind of in a certain mode and you do need to scale up and kind of just have the sheer number of people to achieve everything, which there are instances where you might want to do that. But also I think depending on what you're trying to optimize for, it could be, as we've heard from previous talks, the need to bring in specialists in certain areas. It could be the need to actually kind of, get outside expertise in, or change the culture a little bit and, bring in some real kind of trigger points and incentives for that to happen. So I don't always think, we're all kind of very focused on delivering things and making an impact and all of that kind of stuff. But I think that actually when it comes down to it, it is essentially for me, what are you trying to achieve and why?
Kat, I want to dig in just slightly on your question around kind of keeping things in proportion. Because I've seen companies do it both ways. I've seen companies that just hire, and everyone who has open heads can hire them as fast as they want. And it often leads to the situations you described, where you've got like one designer trying to help 4 teams, and then everyone's annoyed, and then the designer quits. But equally, I've also seen companies where they would wait and gate on that last hiring the PM before the engineering leader could then go and hire more engineers. Like, does anyone have any experience with either of those modes, and would you suggest one over the other?
So this was something that we ran into in a negative way, actually. A company where we were scaling up the team. It's actually similar numbers to what you were talking about at Zoopla. We took the team from about 30 to 200, and we did it without synchronizing with product, and it was an absolute disaster in terms of prioritization. We had this great team. We put so much effort into finding like the people who were like just going to bring amazing energy to the team, amazing skills to the team. We were super excited. We put in tons of energy into onboarding them, and then when we got there, we found that we'd absolutely melted our counterparts in terms of that prioritization. So I think I've experienced the negative end of it. In the company where I'm at now, I'm only 5 months into the role at the moment, but it's a really interesting dynamic because it's a much more mature company. The company's been going for 20 years, and there's a good proportion of the engineering team who've been there for the majority of that journey with the company. And coming from startups, I'm looking down the sheet and I'm used to, as you were saying, like the 2 to 3 year sort of tenure. And you're looking down the sheet and you're like 12 years, 15 years, 8 years. You're like, my God, this is incredible. But then we've got this toss up now with, we want to reshape the teams. We really want to, the reason that I've been brought in is because we want to take more of a startup mindset. We want to really push the product. We want to push to drive more growth out of the company. And, in terms of the balancing act, we're trying to balance that, amazing dedication and knowledge and commitment to what has been built whilst trying to bring in new energy as well into the teams. So we are going to, we already have reset some of the ratios, and we're going to be hiring in, as you say, sort of keeping it very gated and being very methodical about how we add to the team. We're not actually going to grow the team overall very much, but we are going to be over the next sort of year and a half trying to address the ratios, which is going to be, maybe if we sit here in 18 months, I can compare and contrast for you. But as I sit here, I know I'm not going to do it the previous way at this point.
Before we move on from my provocative statement, which clearly has been proven wrong, what are some of the hidden costs of hiring that, if you haven't done a lot of it, you wouldn't necessarily anticipate?
I'll go with a non-obvious one, which is there's quite a cost in terms of energy and emotional kind of weight for the people that are in the hiring loops. Particularly if you do it at scale, you have to really pay attention to how the team is feeling. What you end up with is a lot of people obviously will kind of put themselves forwards and really take the lead. And what you find is they then get burned out over time in sort of interviewing and those kinds of things. So there is a real hidden cost around just the human factor here. And so I'd say before you even think about anything else, consider a process that is fair and equitable across your organization. Include as many people as you can, equip people, and make sure that they get time out, right? So hey, you can take 2 weeks out of the loops because you've been a hero so far up until this point. So yeah, that's a very obvious one for me.
Yeah, I think there's one point within that I would just highlight even more, which is quite often you take your best people from a team, your best developers, and you're like, you're so good, we want you to find the other people who are as good as you are. And you either end up giving them 2 jobs to do because they still do the same full-time job because they feel such a sense of accountability to the rest of their team to deliver what they said they'd deliver, and then they have a whole other job as an interviewer. Or you end up with someone who's pulled so much in towards interviewing that the team's productivity takes a hit because one of your best people is no longer doing the thing that they are amazing at. And so how do you balance that and compensate for that? And just because someone is technically brilliant, it also doesn't mean they're a great interviewer or great at reading people. Those 2 things do not always correlate. It depends what you're interviewing for. But too often I see companies will pull great people out and say, you're good at doing X, so we're now going to make you do Y, and we expect you to be just as good at that. And sometimes it works, but they're two different skills, need different training, different selection processes as to how you choose who the right people are to interview.
Excellent. I want to move us on because we've got a lot of ground to hire. So if we were going to talk a little bit about designing loops and things like that. Just go watch Martha's talk on video when it comes out. Second provocative statement coming from me for people to react to is if you do have to hire, don't hire the best people you can.
Do you have unlimited money? Are you Netflix and you can, set a personal market and pay everybody top of market? No, I think it, best is a very fuzzy word and it's different for everybody, right? So you need to hire the best people for you, for the stage that you are at, for the type of culture you have, for the gaps that you have identified when you've gone through that. I'm going to avoid hiring. I'm going to hire as a last resort. So now I have a very clear idea of what skills I need or what gaps I'm trying to fill in the team. So you should have an idea of what best for you looks like, which is not, there is no universal best. There are people who are technically brilliant, but might be a cultural mismatch. And you often hear about brilliant jerks. I'm sure those jerks aren't always jerks. I'm sure in some cultures they would fit right in, you never know. But there is definitely a balance to be found. And, Google spent a lot of time researching what makes brilliant teams. I don't know, I expect most people here have read, kind of Project Oxygen, which was what makes a great manager, and Project Aristotle, which is what makes a great team. And they found that getting together loads of really top performers and all of the people who were brilliant actually made for disastrous teams because you had people who were competing with each other. They were constantly fighting each other. Everybody wanted to be the smartest person in that room. And what made great teams was psychological safety. And that comes from being able to kind of respect and see the value in each person in the room and what they can bring to that conversation. And you could have a team of average people who want to learn, have a hunger, have a sense of accountability, who might not technically be the best, but they will get there as a team much faster than people who are pulling in different directions.
Definitely. Oh, sorry, go on, Sally.
No, thank you. I was just going to say, I've over my time hired people from a complete different range of backgrounds as well, and so I think I'm very much for. I was nodding away to previous talks again this morning in terms of technology agnostic hiring and actually getting people from different backgrounds. And you might have somebody who's a fantastic subject matter expert who can bring a lot to the business, but actually isn't necessarily kind of the best candidate in a more traditional sense, but can bring you so much. So I think it is, going back to your point of what do you actually need? What are you really looking for? And where can you compromise? Where can you find the wild cards? And I think that for me, it's always about kind of having that clear and structured and equitable hiring process, which means that you're not bringing bias or subjectivity into it, but also leaving yourself open to being surprised and to, finding people with strengths that you may not have expected that actually could be amazing for you.
I think the point around different backgrounds is really interesting because when I hear hire the best person, it implies that you can define one best person, and then I get very nervous about diversity within teams as well. As you say, it takes a huge range of backgrounds to build the best products, and what I'm really looking for is when I'm building a team is the motivation, the energy that somebody can bring to what you're trying to do, and trying to build that diversity into the team as well, trying to build a group of people who can challenge each other, who can have that productive conflict to really get to better answers. If you hire a bunch of people in a monoculture, yes, it might feel easier because everyone's going to agree with each other, but you're not going to get to the best outcomes for the business as well.
One of the things that makes me most nervous, so we tend to invest in companies that kind of stage A to C, do a bit of seed investing. And when I get a CEO who messages me and goes, amazing, we've just had this engineer from Google or this engineer from Amazon accept our offer. And this is like a Series A company. I'm like, oh no. Oh, no. I know what message I'm going to get in about a month's time after they've started, which is they haven't solved all of our problems. Why have they not come in with the magic answer that's come from... Yeah, and you've got to look at, the company the size of Amazon or Google, yes, they have great reputations, but the infrastructure that exists around that person means that the nature of their role that they would be doing there is very different to the nature of the role. And what best looks like when you're hiring will change each stage of your company. So if you're pre-product market fit, the person who's great for you is not going to be the same person who's great for you at 1,000 people when you're internationalizing, when you're launching multiple product verticals. So you need to constantly be evolving what good looks like for you, and not just say, to your point, there's lack of diversity of saying, right, this is the best, this is how we define the best, this is it, and everybody will fit this mold. You need to be willing to constantly be pivoting and changing that, because what you need as an organization, if you're doing it right and you are scaling, it should be a different problem that you're facing every time, because you've solved the last one. You won't be facing the same problems again and again and again.
Just to build on that, one thing that became very clear to us when we were doing the extensive hiring at Zoopla was, and this is an obvious statement, it's a two-way street, hiring, right? You're as much interviewing a candidate as a candidate is interviewing you, and I think it's really important that you are clear in both directions. The thing that became clear to us at Zoopla was that we would interview for the culture that we wanted and then introduce people to the culture that we had, but we weren't clear with them that there was a gap between those two things. And so we would have these amazing, interview loops with these passionate interviewers who were saying, come and join us, this is going to be awesome. And then it was kind of like people would show up to our monolithic Perl, code base and go, okay. So earlier on, Martha said something about being technically conservative, I believe you described it as, which I think is amazing, because you're setting out very early on, if you join us, this is how it's going to be. And I think to sort of bring it all back to everything that's been said so far, context matters, and hiring the right people for the context means that A, you need to know what your context is, and B, you need to actually be very clear with your candidates about what that context is, so that they can show up, hopefully to improve the organization, hopefully to bring something additional to your culture, but also not surprised when they walk through the door and go, what the heck is this? So just be very clear on both sides that it's definitely something where you're hiring for something that you want, but you've got probably something slightly different than what you're talking about.
True. Well, time is flying, and each of these subjects I suppose we could spend a long time on. Please feel free to seek out our panelists afterwards for more detail on this, because it's a really important topic. I want to move on to my third provocative statement, which is, you should not try to retain your employees.
Let me get on my soapbox here. So, what is it with companies that have this smog-like tendency to be like, I have to hoard all the best talent. I'm going to get it, I'm going to keep it, and they can never leave. Once they're here, we're going to lock them in with benefits and options and everything else. And I think it comes back to the point we just made, which is, what is right for you will change. And that is okay. That is inevitable. You're entering into a relationship of sorts. It's like a marriage with these people. And to expect that you will change at exactly the same rates in exactly the same ways is unlikely. The average tenure in startups is about 2 years. And yet all of our retention mechanisms, things like a 4-year vest, are designed with this idea that you want to be keeping people for the long term. And this comes back, for me, I ask companies to think about what their highest lifetime value employees are. In the same way you're looking at a certain customer base and you're understanding which customers do we want to spend money to acquire. Think about what kind of employees we want to acquire. If you are an organization that needs innovation, creativity, new ideas, you're going to need a higher turnover of staff to keep that fresh thinking and new ideas, because people will become institutionalized. They will have built the things themselves. So it's harder to then challenge the thing that you built and question it and tear it down and say that's not working for us anymore. And sometimes fresh eyes coming in and looking at that problem is exactly what you need. You don't want people to become protective or defensive and to be too institutionalized in that. But conversely, if you're an organization that is, deep tech, and so academic excellence and really understanding a subject matter deeply is important, then you do want to retain. You want to keep as much domain knowledge and as much context. And so a longer tenure is going to be more important for you. And you have to understand what you need, which types of employees bring you the most value. Is it those kind of fireworks that will come in, bring a lot of energy, bring a lot of ideas, but they'll move on, and it's okay to let them go? And if you've given them the right support and you've built an amazing culture, what you're doing is seeding all of these brand advocates who will go out and attract more great talent like them to your organization, because they'll be going out and talking about what an amazing experience they had at other companies they're joining subsequently. If you're holding on to everybody, then a lot of your brand evangelists are locked within your organization, and your employer brand and what you stand for and what you achieve won't spread. At Wise, one of the things that we were very keen to do, we wanted to be known as a launch pad for entrepreneurs, and we did everything we could to find people who wanted to go and found their own businesses. And it makes me incredibly proud now when I see people I've hired who have now founded all these other businesses. They've gone to work at all these other brands, and you see XYs on their LinkedIn. And that's because it was the right time for them to move on. And a lot of them have come back at various points. They've gone away, they've learned something new, and at the time when their now problems realigned, they came back on a positive sense, not because they'd been fired because they'd started coasting because they weren't enjoying it and they weren't challenged and we had to, fire them, but we let them go on a high. They went on to continue that trajectory, and then at a point when it's right to come back, they do. But holding on to people until it reaches a point of failure isn't right for either side. Sorry, let me get off my soapbox. It's a big rant. This topic I feel very strongly about.
Great soapbox.
I was just going to remind us all about what we just talked about as well, though, of the cost of hiring and the cost of replacing. So I'm going to just take the opposite stance very quickly in terms of, I think that in terms of if you do have great people, I would never begrudge somebody moving on to a fantastic opportunity and things like that. But I think it's about being mindful and not letting people go when that's regrettable. And so actually, tracking the people that you have lost and you maybe didn't mean to, who, could have a fantastic career ahead and could have all those opportunities. I think there is some internal work that needs to be done in those sort of situations to make sure that actually those people did see themselves having a future. They did have progression opportunities, they did have innovation, things to excite them, a technical strategy that was amazing and things like that. So actually, I think just being mindful of the cost and all the turbulence that can come when you do lose a super high performer is a really important thing to have in mind as well.
Yeah, I think we should retain people for as long as possible, but no longer. And I think, the obvious statement of the day. What I think about a lot is what are the levers of retention that we have, and you just enumerated some of them there. I think being really clear about what it is that people need, both from sort of a cerebral kind of mental perspective, the head perspective, also the heart perspective. What do they need from a care and attention and belonging and all of those kinds of things? And I think we should absolutely maximize those for as long as we possibly can. And through doing that, you hopefully create a workforce that grows along with the company and learns together. And then at some point, the right time will be for them to move on and for them to take a different role. I think it's happened to everyone sitting up here. It's almost certainly happened to everyone in the audience. And at that point, for the good of our industry, I think we have to find ways to help people become brand ambassadors, those kinds of things. So for me, it's kind of a case of just make it the right obvious choice for someone to stay for as long as humanly possible by truly understanding who they are, what they care about, and providing the support that they need. And then, when the time has come, figure out how to help them move on to what's next. Off the back of that, I think you also need to think very carefully about how you grow people and how you have a systemic view on filling the gaps that people leave when they leave, because they invariably will. So I just think about, retention levers, make it something that people want to stay for as long as possible, and in the background, figure out how you then actually have an organization that's a healthy shape in terms of seniority, experience, and all of those kinds of things. So for me, it's a bit of a system that you kind of have to think through from both angles.
One example on this that springs to mind, so one of the things I loved that they put in place at Wise was a 4-year sabbatical. So at the end, 4 years after joining, when your options have vested, so that's a natural inflection point where a lot of people, having been on quite an exhausting journey for 4 years, will stop and assess what's next for them. And so what we basically said was we're going to allow people, to pay for them to do an extended sabbatical, like a 3-month time off. And the reason why it was 3 months and not kind of a month that you would commonly see at other companies is because we knew a lot of people would use their holiday for that year and extend it to about 4 months. And if someone's out of the organisation for like 4 months at a time, you cannot just coast with the existing team until they get back. And so because we knew when it would happen, we knew what year it would happen in, it forced managers to really work on succession planning. So you would know that if this employee stays for 4 years, they're probably going to be out for about 4 months here. So who is going to be able to step up and cover that? Do we need to hire? Do we need to kind of level up the existing team? And so they would, 18 months before someone's 4-year date, make sure, and as kind of the people person, I would sit down with them and go through what is your succession plan for this person. Assume they go on sabbatical, have a life-changing event, and don't want to come back. And so we forced every single manager to assume that their top performers that had stayed and the team had relied on for the last 4 years were no longer there. And this, as a thought exercise, was incredibly helpful to force managers to really plan for those eventualities. And what we saw was it was rare that people didn't come back, and when they didn't come back, it was because it was the right thing all round, that they'd reached a point where they'd made themselves effectively redundant because they had been training their successor over the last 18 months and they could step away knowing their work and the team were taken care of. But also, you'd have people who come back and they wanted to do something entirely different, and they would pivot, and we would then support them to take a lateral move and to pivot into doing something entirely different. That when they were in the day-to-day weeds of their job and felt like everything relied on them, they didn't think they could step away and try and do something completely different. So we freed up that person to really think about, what do you want next in your career? There's no pressure because we'll be able to cover for all of the things that currently sit on your shoulders. But as a manager, you now need to work with that person. It gave them something to look forward to that meant we could bank most people would stay for 4 years, because why wouldn't you if you're going to get 3 months paid holiday? It would be a no-brainer, and your options. But putting in place mechanisms like that we found so helpful to sell as a positive for people, but force the right behaviours in teams to really plan for.
Excellent. Well, unfortunately, we are at time. We had so much more to cover. But thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedules, all of you, to come and share this. We have decades worth of really amazing experience up here. I would encourage everyone to, if you want more information, seek out one of our panelists and continue the conversation over lunch. But thank you, everyone, for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the day.